Film, television, commercials, new media. You are listening to Producer's Pal, unmasking the business of filmmaking and sharing killer advice from seasoned pros. And now your host, Joshua Brown.
Welcome to Producer's Pal, episode number 18. I'm Joshua Brown. This episode is sponsored by Indie Film Finance Guide. Learn more at producerspal.com/finance guide. Today on the podcast, Mark Stolaroff. He teaches a school on no-budget filmmaking. You can learn more about this episode at producerspal.com/Mark Stolaroff. 2 Fs. All right, welcome to the podcast, Mark Stolaroff.
Thank you.
Very cool. Yeah, thanks for coming on, Mark. It's been a while. I haven't seen you for a while. I think we chatted a few months back about some projects, and then before that, I actually met you at your no-budget film school. Would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself and about that no-budget film school?
Sure. Yeah, you were a very good student in no-budget film school. I remember you asking a lot of good questions, and then of course you wrote that great write up about the class, which was really appreciated. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'm an independent producer in Los Angeles. I have kind of a weird background as far as producing. I've really been a DIY person, at least in my personality, for forever. And so when I came out to Los Angeles, it was really with the thought, and this was a long time ago, but with the thought of making my own films. With the money that I had saved up and as a director, and kind of following Clerks, which was the film I'd seen that earlier that year, and it really, I mean, I'd seen a lot of other no budget films, but Clerks really, there's my phone, really inspired me, and so I came out to do that, and then I did, I started working in production at Corman, and kind of working my way up the production track, and then working on just a series of kind of no budget films, with the idea that I was going to learn from other people's mistakes and other people's films, and then eventually make my own. And then this opportunity came along as I was kind of studying no budget filmmaking and studying the films that were successful and trying to figure out what were the things that these films had in common. And I kind of wrote a lot about it, actually. And I found out about this company called Next Wave Films when I was at South by Southwest in 1997. This was a new company that a gentleman named Peter Broderick was starting, and I had read about it in IndieWire, which was very new, actually, IndieWire at the time. Mm-hmm. And he was there at South by Southwest promoting this new company that the Independent Film Channel was financing. And I was like, oh my God, this sounds like perfect for me. It was a company that was going to give finishing funds to the kinds of films that I wanted to make and that I had been studying. And in fact, these filmmakers that I was kind of following were on his board of advisors, like Kevin Smith, Rodriguez, and all these people. And I was like, wow, and I come from a business background, not to go, too far back in my background, but I have a business degree, and I was in investment banking for a couple of years. And and this idea of producing or being involved in another way. And I ran a theater. I was a producer. I ran a theater for 5 years in Houston before I left to come to LA. Where I was, very hands-on. It was very DIY theater. I acted in the shows. I did all the sound design for all the shows. We produced about 40 shows while I was there. We did the only Texas production in the Edinburgh Fringe Festival in '93, and so I had a kind of a background in producing, and this just sounded like a perfect thing for me. And I literally kind of hunted him down in the hallways at Southwest. And gave him my resume, and then eventually, when we got back to LA, because he's based in LA as well, I interviewed with him, and I showed him all these notes and all that. I literally kept this like spreadsheet of all these like films I'd seen, and I think that was a big reason he hired me, was that he could see what my taste was. And anyway, that's 6 years of working with him and looking at all these great and mostly not so great no budget films. Really, it kind of turned, my career a certain direction. And as far as no budget film school goes, it's really the big, in addition to my own producing, which I've done in the last 10 years, I think that the experience at no budget at Next Wave Films is really informs a lot of what you saw in that class, as far as understanding their priorities and what's important and what's not. And the rules of the no budget film world are completely different than the rules of even $500,000 films, or certainly studio films. And I, from the class, I kind of go through that to try to give people an understanding of that. It's not, the rules are soft. It's not a hard and fast thing, but it's definitely a different environment, and the people who champion these films and what they like about them are very different from what a lot of people think. And so I think a lot of people, get in there and they focus on the wrong things when they're trying to make a no budget film.
Right.
So.
Now, just to give people who may not know you a little bit better idea of who you are, so you worked at Next Wave, and while you were there, you saw, like you said, lots of projects, some of them good, most of them not very good. And an example of one of those films that was probably pretty good, but it didn't seem to get the right time of day, was one from who we now know as a famous director, and that movie was Following, right?
Actually, Following, was one of that film actually did pretty well for us. I mean, it wasn't as huge a hit as some other films around that time period, but yeah, we had the first film actually that we had committed to getting involved with was Pi, which was Darren Aronofsky's first film, and I worked on that film for about 4 months, and that deal kind of fell through. And then we actually did Joe Carnahan's first film. That's that year at Sundance, the year that Pi was at Sundance. We would have had both those films at Sundance, actually. So a little few months after that, we took a look at Following, and this was no easy film. I mean, it was a 69-minute, black and white, very, very small film, but clearly, a lot of talent in the filmmaking, and we really liked Chris a lot, and so when we got involved, it had already played one festival, but when we got involved, we gave him finishing funds, blew it up to 35, gave him an opportunity to redo the sound, which wasn't so great. But also it just sounds, film sounds better when it's on 35 than when it's on 16, which is what it had been in previously. And then we helped get it into Toronto, which was a big deal for that film. And we got distribution out of Toronto. We sold a few foreign territories, even though that really wasn't our mandate to be a foreign sales agent for a film. We were the producer's rep for all the films that we invested in, but we usually hired a producer's foreign sales agent. But we made some sales. We and then worked really hard on that film. I probably worked a pretty solid 4 years on that film, and the various ups and downs and various stages of it. But yeah, that film ultimately made money. I mean, it did okay on the domestic side. But on the foreign side, we sold several territories, and I was writing checks to Chris, within a year or two, which is not easy to do. I mean, we'd put a decent amount of money into the movie. He hadn't put any money in the movie.
Right, that was the no budget film right there.
Yeah, I mean, he'd spent $12,000, and that's a real $12,000. That got him all the way to the 16 millimeter print that he was showing at San Francisco International Film Festival. So we put about $75,000 in total, like everything we did, like. Blow it up, and also we did a trailer for the distributor who and helped kind of keep their costs down. We did a number of little things here and there over those years, so that was like kind of total amount of money that we put in the movie, and eventually it recouped, and we started writing them checks, and so that film did all right. Again, it wasn't the kind of Pie story where it was picked up for $1 million out of Sundance. Mm-hmm. But I think Chris has done pretty well since then.
Yeah, he's done all right. I've got 3 or maybe 4 or 5 of his films on my shelf right now, so I don't know. But it's interesting because that film, like you said, it's got a $12,000 budget, and that's definitely no budget. Of course, that was a little bit more money back then, but that was real cost. Like he had to buy and process film, and then.
And he never had $12,000 at one time. That's the important thing to remember, is that it ultimately cost him that much money, but he never had that to start with. He spent the little bit he had each week, what he had left over to make his movie, which is why it took him a year to shoot it and all that.
Right. And now it's in some ways it's sort of a poster child for, one, no budget filmmaking, and two, kind of a French New Wave kind of ish, and then it's how you can craft together this story and do something really, really original with a limited budget.
Yeah, and I think one of the lessons from that, I don't really say this in the class, but I've been thinking a lot more about this kind of idea, is that the things in that movie don't cost money. I mean, it's not easy to make a no-budget film, and it's not easy to make a great film. I mean, you have to be talented and lucky and work hard, but dialogue is cheap. Cutting, editing is cheap. What he did with the structure of that film doesn't cost money. It's hard to do that, well. But If you look at that film, it's a very small film in a lot of ways. It's contained. He's not overreaching, and those things don't cost money. And even good acting, doesn't have to cost money. You can find good actors out there. They may not be famous, but none of the people in his movie were famous. So I think that's also a good example of just the things that he does in there don't cost money.
Yeah, very cool. So, Mark, you said you didn't want to go back too much into your or you weren't going to go back too much into your history. But I'm curious, what is it that drew you to filmmaking? Did you see like a Spielberg film and it was like, oh, that's what I have to do now? Or you said you were directing theater for a while, or producing theater, and you decided to just come out here and do film?
Yeah, I think. I mean, it's hard to say. Probably what it was. I mean, I certainly watched a lot of television. I stayed up. I was always a late owl, and I stayed up late and watched stuff. And the stuff that comes on back when I grew up, Josh.
Yeah.
There were 3 channels.
Yes,
there were 3 networks, and then there were 2 other channels, so there were 5 channels, and hardly.
And you had to get up to turn the channel. Is that it?
Yeah, you had to get up. That was absolutely true. I don't remember when I first got a remote, but you had to get up and turn the channel. Which was fine because there weren't that many channels. But there was like VHS, VHF, and UHF, and there were these channels that didn't come in all that well, and there was and there was very little selection at night when I stayed up. And I mean, I became a student of like sketch comedy because I started watching Saturday Night Live when it came on in '75. That became like my favorite show. And Monty Python, I discovered that in 5th grade when they used to run it on the PBS station. And so I kind of grew up with that kind of stuff. And was a real sketch comedy person. I used to do a lot of sketch comedy as a kid. Like at school, like we would just do it in front of a class. It wasn't even a class, that had anything to do with that. We would come up with a skit and we would ask the teacher if we could do it. And so I think that's actually informs a lot of my desire. And then my dad was a real shutterbug. He had a camera, an 8mm Super 8 camera, and we used to watch the films, and I used to love that. And so when I was in high school, actually, and before high school, we had this plan of making a big film.
Yeah.
And like 3rd and 4th and 5th grade, we were running around. We would kind of talk about it, and we never actually shot anything, but we had it all planned out, and we lived in a place where there was a big bayou area and woods, and we had a tree fort and all this like stuff. So we would play out there, and then eventually, when I got into high school, I started making films instead of book reports because that was, easier for me. I wasn't a very good writer, and no one was doing that. I mean, no one was doing. It was hard to do. You couldn't edit it. I mean, I just shot the stuff and edited it in camera, and but I remember I broke my dad's camera. I dropped it on this opus I was working on that was going to be the greatest thing in the world, and unfortunately, I never finished that first film. And then I made this film called A Trip to the Zoo, which wasn't very good. And then I made Tarzan, King of the Apes in the bayous. And when my friend was Tarzan, and he swam in the bayou, and we had vines he was swinging on, and
wow.
that was pretty great. That was like my freshman year in high school. And then I made a kind of puppet. It wasn't stop action, but it was a puppet with kind of thing that was Dante Go to Hell. It was for book report. We're supposed to do Dante's Inferno, and so I had Dante's Go to Hell, and Sluggo was from Mr. Bill show was the devil, and Mr. Bill was Dante, and I had all these like dolls that my sister had a doll collection. Anyway, it was silly, obviously. And so when I got to college, I would have wanted to make to major in film and make films. I really thought about it, but I thought you can't make a living doing that. And there weren't really film schools. I mean, UT, University of Texas, had a undergraduate film program. It was actually one of the best in the country, but I just couldn't imagine majoring in that, because if I realized if I wasn't any good at it, I would be stuck with essentially would have been a communications degree. So I chickened out, and I majored in business, and actually got into this thing called the Business Honors Program. And then my roommate, who Tom Provost, who you interviewed, was kind of the same way. He got to Texas, and he was in Plan 2, which was like an Ivy League school within the rest of the school. But he had this idea, he loved movies, and he wanted to act and all this like stuff. And we started talking about the film classes, and we both snuck into the film classes at UT while we were majors, and ended up doing film production. And so I ended up making films in school on 16 millimeter, and he actually went a semester further than I did because I had to finish my major and stuff. But so we made these films, and then when I graduated, I kind of chickened out again and went into investment banking, because that's the job that everybody was taking in the late 80s. and I figured I could earn a couple years credit with my parents and then kind of go and do whatever I wanted. And that's kind of the way it worked out. My dad actually got sick in the middle of my 2 years, and I had to go back to Houston to help take care of my mother and him. He had a stroke, but that actually kind of, was an interest that kind of steered me, and probably had a lot to do with where I am now. But
Yeah.
but anyway, I went back to Houston, finished up my investment banking there, and then started this theater with a friend of mine that I grew up with, who I used to do the skits with, and with this idea that, oh man, this will be fun. Let's do this theater. I didn't care about theater, but I thought I really wanted to do the skits and the Saturday Night Live kind of stuff. And so, and then eventually, I had done a film internship when I was in Houston. I actually applied for this big internship that Sundance had that I was a finalist and went to LA to interview for, but I didn't get it. And so I was always hanging on to the film thing, and we wrote our own shows, a lot of them at Curtains, and eventually just became, I really do want to do the film thing. And so that eventually I had to move to LA to do that.
Okay. So that's when you came out here. And how did you run into Peter? Because that's where your career started. Is that right? Well,
again, I came out at the end of '94 and started working at Corman right away. A friend of mine from college was actually running the studio, so I got a job on a film as a PA. Nice. I was just about 30 years old, so I was an old PA, and quickly after a week on my first film, this is how it worked at Corman. The location manager got bumped up to a better position on another movie, and they bumped me up to location manager from PA. I'd worked a week on that movie, and I knew nothing about location managing. It was like $1.5 million film with Martin Sheen and F. Murray Abraham, and I was just like thrown into the fire, which is the way they teach you there. And so I did probably, I don't know, 3 or 4 films at Corman before I started doing other films. I think I moved up a little too quickly. I was doing like first AD work on these lower budget things, even though I really wasn't all that well equipped to be a first AD. I mean, I think I was good at being first AD. I just didn't have a lot of experience doing it. But and that's around after doing some of that is when I ran into Peter at South by Southwest in '97.
Okay, gotcha. And that's when. So that wasn't your first bit. That's just kind of where the producing track of it sort of stemmed from.
Yeah, and again, I was doing, when you're doing kind of first AD stuff, and I had been like a co-producer or associate producer on a junkie movie that was shot in Houston that I was ADing and also kind of helping produce. So I was taking on more of a producing role when I got out to LA as opposed to a directing role. I really just wanted to see how things worked and meet people, and then eventually write something or co-write something with my old partner from Curtains and then make something. But I knew I would be producing whatever I was going to be making myself anyway. So that was kind of a natural thing to be producing as well.
Very cool. So you then worked with Peter, you said, for 6 years at Next Wave, and then you just decided to strike out on your own?
Well, Next Wave, we had a pretty good run, and then during that time, the film business kind of changed quite a bit. When Peter came up with the idea for it, it was the early 90s, and there were all these like films that were breaking out at Sundance, and these new companies were sprouting up to kind of acquire them, and they were starting to become successful. And then, after we started the company, the studios got into that market in a big way and kind of co-opted the film world and started their own little mini major things, and it pushed out a lot of the lower budget films. Now Sundance was being kind of occupied a lot with films that had bigger stars in it, and there were a number of things happening during that 6 years that made it more difficult for our business model to work. And then eventually, we got involved in like 13 films, and yet it was still very difficult. We were having to kind of work really hard on. You wouldn't just get involved with the film and then move on to the next film. You were working on 10 films at one time, and it was just difficult. So eventually, IFC closed the doors on us, and Peter had to go his own way, and I had to go my own way. So Peter's a big consultant, as you know, and in the area of distribution, which was what was changing, and making it harder for us. And I kind of set out with this idea of getting back into kind of maybe producing micro budget films, which is, I tell everybody who takes my class, not a very good way to make a living, but it was what I knew how to do, and frankly, what I really enjoyed doing. So I had early on, I had wanted to start a company that was going to make a slate of films, which is what Antic Pictures is, but we never ended up doing the slate thing, I was working with two partners, and we had, put a business plan together to make like 8 films for $200,000, that kind of thing. And
Wow.
and I still like that model. I've actually been talking to some other folks over that 10-year period who were pretty serious about putting together a slate, and one of them was going to be like a $25 million slate, and then I don't know, things happen. He got busy, and that still may happen someday. But I like the slate model. It's difficult, but I think there's some advantages to that. But my whole point with the model was not to make really commercial films. It was to have the business plan allow you to make hard films, difficult films that would be artistically challenging and that would represent kind of really good independent filmmaking, and that the business model would help mitigate the normal risk that comes with making those kinds of films, as opposed to making a slate of like horror films that are all quote commercial. I've never really been that interested in making ostensibly commercial films that are just to make money. I think filmmaking is hard, and I just assume go back and do investment banking or sell real estate if I was going to just do it for the money. So it was all about trying to find ways to make things that I got excited about, but make money on them. I believe in you need to make money.
Right.
So
well, explain to us that slate model film for those who aren't who don't know too much about that. What are you talking about, that business model of the slated films, and why that's easier and potentially more feasible?
The way I see it is, so let's say we had a business plan where we had $1 million or $1.5 million to make so many films over a period of let's say 3 or 4 years.
And this is from private equity, I'd assume.
Yeah, it would be it'd be equity. There's different ways to do it. You could bring in some foreign sales companies perhaps and do some pre-sales, but it just depends on the kind of films you're planning to make and what your relationships are. And I think every film can kind of develop differently as well. I don't think there has to be a set way to every film being done the same way. But the one advantage, if you have $1.5 million in the bank and you put your flag down and you say, okay, we're in the business of doing these films. We want to make artistically challenging films. We want to make really good films. We own some equipment already, so we're taking certain things off of the budget. So if it's a $200,000 budget, the camera and some of the other equipment that you're going to use isn't going to be in that budget. So we'll have more money for other things. So there's some economies of scale that start happening. But I think the real big advantage is just if and this was what happened with Next Wave, is once you have money in the bank, and you tell people, hey, we're here, people show up on their doorstep, and some of them, don't have any talent, don't have much to, show, but some of them really do. And Indigent did this very successfully for several years. They were kind of our cousin company when we were at Next Wave, because IFC was owned Indigent as well, owned part of it. And so I think, they did this film, Pieces of April, for instance, which was a film that had been set up to be made for like $6 million, and it was all cast and everything was ready to go, and then it fell through. And then they were there like, hey, we don't have $6 million, we have $300,000, but you've got all the pieces are already there. Come over here. We'll you do it exactly the way you want to do it. We're not going to interfere. We'll spread the wealth because it's not a lot of money. So your cast can take a gross participation and blah, 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 blah. And so that we were really following that type of a model, or wanted to. And again, with some flexibility in terms of, who come, we expected producers to come to us with develop projects. We didn't want to spend money to develop projects. We weren't going to necessarily be optioning material or paying writers to write things, but producers come to us. Here's a film we've got. We actually have a couple of attachments maybe, and we could look at that and if we liked it, greenlight it immediately. And I think there was a big advantage to certain producers would understand the advantage of someone being able to just greenlight something that quickly, that they also felt were simpatico with them as far as their tastes and weren't going to get in the way and make things more commercial for some stupid reason or whatever. I mean, we were going to be real partners, artistic partners. And I still love that model. Again, it's a risky model. There's still risks in there, but a lot of the portfolio theory and other things that come with a slate, mitigate. There's all kinds of ways to mitigate the normal risks of making a single film. And one of them is, distribution. I mean, you can hire what we would have called a one-man distribution company or one-man marketing company that would, and now, with social media, a bigger thing than it was back then, really develop the niche, audiences for these films so that you have kind of a plan B for every film. I mean, the idea would be plan A would be, it goes into Sundance or Toronto or someplace like that and gets picked up. But knowing that that's really difficult, the plan B, you're working very diligently on the plan B for each film, which is we're gonna we're gonna understand who these niche markets are. We're gonna be connecting with that audience wherever they live, through social media, through offline or wherever, before we ever make the film. And in fact, there'll be an analysis done before we greenlight a film that there in fact is an audience for that film that we can reach directly, and blah blah blah. So that was kind of the plan.
Very cool. So what was that first project that you did when you struck out from Next Wave? What was that first project that you did?
Well, I worked on a couple weird little things, TV show ideas and stuff like that. But once we started Antic, while we were looking for money and building the business plan, my producing partner and I, Ron Judkins, who I'd met at Next Wave, he's a filmmaker. He's made a couple of features. He had one in Sundance and that we were a rep on. But he's also a two-time Academy Award-winning sound mixer, and he's been nominated 5 times, and has basically done every Spielberg movie since the late 80s or early 90s.
Wow.
And a really smart guy and a talented filmmaker, as well as obviously one of the best sound mixers in the world. But so we had we were working with another producer on the Antic, and Henry Burial, who I've now obviously worked with several times.
I know Henry.
I'd worked with him at Next Wave Films on a $3,000 film that we got involved with called Somebody, that was in dramatic competition at Sundance. Great movie, your classic no budget film, and they never had $3,000 at one time. Shot with 2-man crew. The director and DP were shooting with both on cameras and that was the whole crew. And
wait, 3,000, not 300,000?
3,000, yeah. This was it was essentially pre-mumblecore film. I mean, people talk about the mumblecore starting in 2005 with certain films like Puffy Chair, but it really, Somebody was a completely improvised mumblecore film before there was ever a term mumblecore. The reason no one knows about it is because after it played Sundance and then was released theatrically, the company Lot 47 that released it went out of business, and then it was never released on video. So no one's ever had a chance to see the film if they didn't catch it on IFC or in the theaters. So unfortunately, because I still think it's a great movie. But anyway, that Henry had gotten into the Sundance Lab after Somebody and was developing a film called True Love out of the Sundance Lab, and was planning to make that film for $2 million, and that kind of fell through, and he was frustrated, and I was keeping up with him, and he's like, man, I just want to make it for like $50,000 or make it with no money. And I think actually I'm not sure who came up with the idea of 50,000. It was just literally just a number that we came up with, but I was telling Ron about it, and I'd seen a reading of it, and I really liked the script. And we said, look, let's do this. Let's just put our own money in, and we'll make this film for $50,000. And it won't be officially an Antic movie, because we won't be part of a slate, but it'll kind of get us. Ron hadn't made a film that low before, and so he really wanted to see how that was going to work. So we just literally invented this number of $50,000 and rewrote the script for LA, and kind of rewrote it for things that we had available to us, like our apartments and houses, and it was mostly already cast from the workshopping that he did when he wrote it. And so we we got this money together and shot it. It was a pretty ambitious film to shoot for $50,000, but we had a lot of ways to kind of do that, and I teach a lot of that in the class, obviously, as you know, and that was our first film, and I'm really proud of that film. It didn't get out there. We played a bunch of festivals, and then before we really worked on the kind of distribution, Henry and I started working on Pig. Actually, while we were going to festivals, he came up with the idea for Pig and pitched it to me when we were on the plane. And then, the course of going to festivals, he started developing it out. And then, we really started working on that and kind of put True Love on the shelf. Unfortunately, just kind of sitting there still. So,
True Love, is that's the name of that film?
Yeah, True Love was the first one. And so,
I was gonna say I haven't seen that one.
Yeah, but you've seen clips from it, from the class.
Right.
That's the
and
film.
I've seen Pig and The House That Jack Built.
Yeah, and so Pig was I think one of those situations where it took us a long time to make True Love, and we kind of forgot about how hard it is to make a no budget film. And it's like when you're pregnant and you say, I'm never gonna have a baby again. This is so hard. I assume, and then a year or two later you forget how hard it was, and you like your baby, and so you get pregnant again. And so that was kind of the experience with Pig. He started writing the script, and it was a great idea, and it started out as being kind of a thriller, but we didn't want to go out and raise money for it. We wanted to, again, put our own money in and get it made. We didn't want to be wasting years looking for money and going through that rat race. So we kind of rewrote it to be more of what it is, which is more of a kind of a mind tease film. I was going to use another word, but and more of a puzzle film as opposed to a straight up thriller. That film took a long time to make as well, just because of the nature of sometimes that's how it works out when you're working with less money than
right.
otherwise.
Right. Okay, so you talked a little bit about that model of the no budget and how you teach it in your class. So you, just for those who don't know, Mark teaches a class called the No Budget Film School, and it's I've been to it. It's a 2-day course coupled with Tom's course that we talked about on a previous podcast. But Mark, if you could kind of give us the overview of the class, what are the concepts, the general concepts that you're sharing with people about the no budget way, I guess?
Well, the class you took was called The Art and Science of No Budget Filmmaking, and it's not a perfect division, but I kind of divide up. The first day is kind of the art of no budget filmmaking, what I call the art of no budget filmmaking, and the second day is more the science of no budget filmmaking. And the science of no budget filmmaking is maybe a little bit more obvious to people. It's like all the kind of tricks of the trade for how to kind of do things for less money. I in that second day I kind of go through the budget of a film, and I use the film True Love as kind of a case study because I can talk about it, and it's a good example. It's a film like a lot of people want to make that are in the class, and so we kind of go through the budget, and I just assume that you don't have any money, and yet there are all these things that are normally on a budget that you may or may not need to pay for, like insurance, or pay for your actors or pay for your crew or your equipment, legal stuff, whatever. So we kind of go through and we talk about ways to you could say cut corners, or do you really need insurance? When do you need it? When you don't? Do you really need to shoot with a permit in Los Angeles? When can you kind of like cut that corner, and when should you never cut that corner? Those kinds of things are covered in the second day, and I try to make that class fun. It's talking about production insurance isn't the most exciting topic, but I try to make the class fun. And as you know, I kind of culminate the kind of first half of that second day, where we talk a lot about the different categories of things, into problem solving in the second half of the day, where we actually I read some scene. We do this twice. I read a scene from True Love, and we talk about what are the production problems in that scene. So everything essentially is a problem. If it says interior apartment day, where are we going to get that apartment? Right. If we're shooting in LA, that could be very difficult to find for no money or for very little money. And so I ask everybody in the class to start naming the problems so that they can start to identify them when they read a scene. And so everybody gives me what they think the problems are, and then everybody tries to solve those problems, and then we talk about how I solve them, and or we solve them on True Love, and then I show a clip of the preparation of that scene, how we, some behind the scenes footage of making that scene, and then the final scene. And I do that twice as a kind of a, culmination of the different things that you're learning in the second day. The first day, though, I think is kind of more an interesting day in the sense that it's not the day I think a lot of people expect when they take the class. The art of no budget filmmaking is really where it's kind of putting you in the right headspace. There's something I call the no budget way, which is, there's a million ways to make a film, but if you understand this idea of the no budget way, you kind of know that there's a right way and a wrong way to do it. So if someone says, I can get you a great deal on an Alexa, and you have no money, and you're going to work with this tiny crew, and you're never going to have a lot of money, and they say, I can get this great deal on an Alexa, but you own a 7D, or your buddy has a 7D, he'll let you borrow. The no budget way is to work with the 7D. It's not to get this great deal on Alexa that you're going to have for 2 or 3 weeks, and then every other time you need that Alexa back, it's going to be $1,000 a day.
Right.
Or you drop the Alexa and now you're screwed. Or you have to understand how to do a slightly more difficult workflow. Actually, the Alexa workflow is pretty easy, but let's say it's a Red, and you're now putting all your attention and energy into this workflow, this difficult workflow, and you'll never have the money in post to actually take advantage of the latitude that you're getting from shooting.
Sure.
Raw. All those kinds of things. That's just there's different ways to make movies, and there's nothing wrong with using a Red, but it's not really the no budget way to use a Red. It's saying the no budget way is saying, you know what, this 7D is going to deliver a pretty good image. And it's not going to be about the image because I'll never have the money to really deliver the kind of highest quality production value anyway. So it's understanding, what the production value is, what the importance of it is, knowing that it's more important that all the production values are even, and as opposed to, a couple of them are really good and the rest of them are really low.
Yeah.
Which, when you unbalance your film, that's a detriment to your film. It's covering those kinds of questions, and really, the big, two basic, things I talk about in the beginning of the day and that first day are embracing your limitations and not fighting all the things that that you normally work against, not fighting and working against them, but having them work for you and understanding how to take advantage of the limitations. And then, the thing that I certainly didn't make any of this up. This is every successful no budget film that's ever been made. Working from the resources you have available to you, writing those things into your script. So that you're not writing a script in a vacuum and then trying to figure out how you're going to find all those different things that you've written in your script. I mean, it's basically looking at the locations you have available to you and saying, okay, I'm going to set my film here at this ranch that I happen to have access to. I'm going to make a movie that the story is that this ranch is actually going to be incorporated into the story, and we're going to shoot at this ranch and or my apartment, or I've got this really cool car, or I've got these, really great friends of mine that are actors. They're not great actors, but they do their own thing really well. So I'm going to write something for them. It's figuring out what your resources, what you have that you can make a movie with, and then letting those resources inspire you to come up with something really unique that's written specifically for your situation and those resources. And I think if people really do that, it's, in the purest way, they're going to come up with something unique because everybody has a different set of resources. Right. And a different set of limitations that are unique to them. And so if they really follow that path, and I give examples of filmmakers who've done that, they'll come up with something unique. And if the secret to getting into Sundance and the secret to what we were looking for at Next Wave Films was something unique, something we hadn't seen before, that was the most important thing that we were looking for at Next Wave Films. And I'd say production value was about the least important thing. And if you look at the films we got involved with, and if you look at Following, there's nothing wrong in the production values of Following, but you wouldn't look at Following and compare it to, a big studio film in terms of the way it looked. I mean, he didn't have the means to do that. So he made something look appropriate and right for the story he was telling and for the situation he was in and for the resources he had available to him. And it's a perfect case study, which is why I use it as a case study in my class. And
I think for myself and probably others who are in similar positions is that you don't have all that quote unquote production value to hide behind. You're then stripped down to your skills and your story and the quality of the people that you're surrounding yourself with. And that's a scary thing, to not be able to blame it on other external factors.
And realize that if you have some cool things to make a film with, even if they weren't things that you thought you wanted to use, like if you did have this ranch and you're like, oh, I wanted to make an urban story. I didn't want to tell a story set out in some ranch, but I have this ranch. And I have all the production value I need for making a story set on a ranch. I have horses. I have whatever, a barn with hay. I have all these lake. I have all these cool stuff that if I was writing a story about a ranch in a vacuum, I would have to go and find the perfect ranch and spend a ton of money to get that production value. Well, you already have that production value, so there's no reason not to have production value if you write for the production value you have. But it's also realizing that there's certain things like. I say this a lot in the class. The particular look that you're going to get from a Red or an Alexa, the very specific, or the ease of using an Alexa versus like a 7D. That's not going to make or break your film at all. It never will. I always try to have filmmakers that come in when I have my guest speakers that worked in this way to demonstrate that those things aren't important. And so, like for instance, in my New York class coming up in a month in October, I've got Alex Karpovsky, who most people know as an actor, I guess, from the TV show Girls and a bunch of other things. But he's a very prolific filmmaker. He's made 5 films, and he had 2 films come out last year. One of them was shot with a one-man crew. And that the one man shot with a 7D and also did the sound, and it looks fine. It's not that it looks great; it looks exactly what that film should look like, considering the story and whatever. And that film was premiered in the Los Angeles Film Festival. You can watch it on Netflix right now. It's a successful film. I mean, it did better than a lot of films that were made for a lot more money that were shot on a Red or whatever. So, so anyway, I just like to if you don't have a lot of money, you really have to make some adjustments and create new templates and and there are just certain things that aren't as important as other things.
And you talk about this fact in your class that you would not recommend no budget filmmaking to someone who plans to get rich. So I mean, obviously, this is you talk about this as a way to get something out there, get started in doing something. And you would is it true that you would suggest that you do this for a couple projects, and then if you're able to, move on to something where you're more able to fulfill your vision, or are you fully entrenched in the no budget way?
No, I'm a big believer in I say it first up. It's a great way to launch a career. It's a really, really difficult way to sustain a career. Eventually, if you want to make money and make a living, I mean, you don't have to make a lot of money maybe in your whole life, but if you want to pay your bills, doing filmmaking, not teaching a class like I do, or teaching at being a professor, which is what some really great no budget filmmakers I know do at UT or whatever. Eventually, you're going to have to move up into the world of kind of television or studio filmmaking or whatever, and it's a scary place to start. It's almost an impossible place to start, and certainly even if you got that break where someone was going to hand you some real money, I wouldn't want to be making a $3 million film if I didn't know what I was doing and had made those mistakes on something where you could kind of get up and dust yourself off and do it again. And so I show a slide in my class of all the filmmakers that people have heard of who started out making no budget films that helped them launch their careers to big studio careers. And I mean, I've worked with a lot of these people, knew them back in the day when I was at Next Wave Films, like David Gordon Green and Mark Forster and Craig Brewer and Joe Carnahan and Jody Hill, who I actually met later when he was a guest speaker in my class. There's a lot of filmmakers who started out making no-budget films that launched their careers into studio films. But what's interesting about that slide is that most people don't know those no-budget films. They weren't necessarily huge hit films. I mean, Pi was kind of a hit film, and it launched Darren Aronofsky's career. But the Foot Fist Way that launched Jody Hill's career, very few people saw that film. I mean, it was at Sundance, the midnight section. It really didn't play a lot of other festivals after that. It got kind of had a half release that Paramount Vantage just kind of dumped, and not a lot of people saw it. But Will Ferrell saw it at Sundance or later, and he said, "I'm going to work with this guy," and that's what helped get him to the next level. So the whole point of no budget films, I think, is it's a great place to learn. I love the process. I mean, that's the kind of films I would make if I could make a living doing them. So you can make bold, interesting, exciting pieces. You can take risks. Those are great things. You have total creative control, which you'll never have again in your career once you have once there's money. But it's also it's a great way to or it can be to kind of show people what you can do. And hopefully get you to the next level. That next level may not be a $50 million studio film. It may be a $200,000 low budget film or $1 million low budget film. There's a lot of different ways that no budget films have launched the careers of some pretty big filmmakers, and it's just about getting to that next level. Maybe you make another film because that first one didn't work out so well. It didn't get the attention, or maybe it wasn't that good. And maybe you still believe that you'd still like to try to do this, which is what Jay Duplass, who was a guest speaker in my class, talked a lot about, how he and his brother made several films that no one saw that were not very good, and they just kept trying until they found their unique voice. And so no budget filmmaking is a great way to figure out the who you are and what you have to say as a filmmaker. So I talk a lot about that in the class, about the kind of advantages of no budget filmmaking and why this is the kind of filmmaking that I would certainly do if I were, new to it. And then, I talk about things that I would do if I were, just rich and I could make films. The stories I want to tell don't necessarily have to cost a lot of money. So I would make films this way forever if I could. I just know that, from doing it, that it's really, really hard to actually have it pay the bills.
Yeah. So with all that in mind, then, what is the future for Mark Stolaroff?
Well, that's a really good question, and if you can answer it, you can tell me. No, I don't know. I mean, I am I'm finishing up we're continuing to work on the house that Jack built, which was Henry's film after Pig. We're doing a big screening in New York, which we haven't announced yet, but it'll be in a month. I will be announcing it soon, I think. And playing some festivals. So I'm still working on that. But I think the next film is going to be something with money, where I actually don't put my own money in or go to someone that I know really well to finance it, but actually go out to a mix of equity investors and either companies that finance or films, or companies that you can collateralize a minimum guarantee, or collateralize estimates on a foreign sales basis, or do some pre-sales, that kind of what I would call real film financing. It's something that I don't know that much about. I've always shunned that. I've always, I've never really been interested in that kind of filmmaking, but I realize that why it's necessary, and so I'm looking forward to kind of learning that whole rigmarole and dog and pony show and whatever, and I've got a couple of projects that I would be nice to, we could probably make them for less money, but I think it'd be nice to try to get some money and do some new things, and just be able to pay people and actually make a fee myself, which is something I don't, I haven't done on the films that I've produced. I don't pay myself to make my own films. So that, it'd be nice to actually get a paycheck to produce a film. So that's probably what I'm going to be working on. I've got a few scripts that I'll be kind of going out to these different people to see if anyone's got some interest in trying to package them and all that kind of stuff.
Very cool. Okay, Mark, thank you so much for coming on. I think what I want to do is begin to just wrap up a little bit, and I'm going to quick fire a few questions off at you.
Sure.
Now, it starts a little deep, but looking back on your career now with the whole no budget way and all your experience, if you could do something differently, what would it be?
I don't know. I'm about to go to my 30-year high school reunion, and there's a part of me that feels like I should have come out here when I was 22 or right after investment banking and just got a job at a studio and worked my way up, and now I'd be rich and successful. And I could go back to my 30-year reunion, with babes under my arms and that kind of thing. I've thought a lot about that recently, but even though I at the time I never would have done that, and I'm sure I would be a very different person and probably not a very nice person. But I don't know. I mean, that's a tough one. I guess I wish we made the last two films, or Pig and True Love, faster, so we could have made more films.
Gotcha.
But sometimes they take a long time.
Yeah. Now, you teach your no budget filmmaking class, and you've no doubt received a lot of advice over the years. But is there one piece of advice that maybe you received that you could share with us that's your best advice for filmmakers?
You know what? I got it. I'm going to steal someone else's great advice. I was at a lecture that this UCLA film instructor did. He started the graduate film program at UCLA, and someone asked him, "What you've taught? Coppola and all these like well-known filmmakers, and some of them went on and became successful, and a lot of them didn't. What was that quality that the successful ones had that the other ones didn't? Was it a good eye, or what was it?" He thought about it. And he said it was persistence. And I think what he meant was essentially that you're going to fail and you're going to have to get back up. And the ones that got back up, like, Coppola failed many times, and some of them are famous, but obviously he failed before he was famous. And those, people like him got back up and kept trying. I think that's what Jay Duplass was saying. And it's hard for us to imagine, like someone like Chris Nolan failing. But his first film was a failure. It never got finished. No one ever saw it, and he never talks about it. He told me about it. It was a film that he made before following, and every successful filmmaker seems to have that kind of, whatever in their attic. And so, I think that's what you have to do. If you really want to do this, don't worry about how good you are. Just keep getting back up and doing it. There's a lot of people that aren't that good that have careers. So.
Yeah. Very cool. Okay, so Mark, let's say you're on a desert island and you had to pick one film for the rest of eternity. What is that movie?
I guess the one answer would be the Monty Python and the Holy Grail. That was a really big, important film for me. I love that film, and it's influential in weird ways. That might be it. If I had two more, I would probably throw in The Godfather, one of the two, because they're both amazing.
Oh, yeah.
I love 70s movies. I don't know, Chinatown. There's a bunch, but I'll stick with my original answer.
All right, Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Okay, what is one movie, TV show, or if you know of any, a YouTube channel that's coming up that has you really excited right now?
Gosh, it wouldn't be a YouTube channel. It would be. There's so many movies that are that are all like coming out and that are just people are just seeing in Venice and Telluride and now Toronto. Probably maybe Gravity.
Yeah,
I mean, there's about 5 or 6 of them, but Gravity, I just saw the newest trailer today, and I love that filmmaker. I think he's a genius, and I can't wait to see that film.
Very cool. All right, Mark, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate you sharing your breadth of experience, your wealth of knowledge with us. What is the best way for the Producers Pal audience to find you online?
So I'm getting ready to teach my 2-day class in New York in October 5th and 6th, and then in LA in November 9th and 10th. And although I'm going to be completely redoing my website, it's being redone right now. They can still go to my junky old website to get that information. It's nobudgetfilmschool.com. And that's the best way to reach me. There's a email address there. If someone wants to email me, I'm always like to hear from people and try to give advice or whatever. That's that address is nobudgetfilmschool@earthlink.net. It'll that'll eventually change probably to be mark@nobudgetfilmschool.com or something like that. But nobudgetfilmschool.com is the best place to see what I'm up to and find me. And the stuff that I've written and other stuff is on there too.
Very cool. Well, Mark Stolaroff, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Josh. This is my pleasure.
If you enjoyed this episode, please go to producerspal.com/Mark Stolaroff, 2 Fs, and share it with your friends. Once again, this episode is sponsored by Indie Film Finance Guide. Learn more at producerspal.com/finance guide.